my relatives.
Through his tears, Vernon Booth told me this is a place he comes to honor his loved ones.
We serve with mighty fine people, and I hate to see them just destroy something that's kind of sacred to us.
This National Historic Site helps him remember our country's past.
All over our nation right now, Civil War memorials and monuments are being torn down. As of August of last year, there were 24 that had already been taken down, and countless others that were in the process of doing so. As a soldier's wife, it makes me have a very emotional reaction when I see memorials to soldiers on either side being torn down and vandalized. And I don't think it's right in an emotional sense. But we can't always rely on our emotions to make the right decision. We have to rely on facts and education. So were Confederate soldiers racists and white supremacists? Or were they like soldiers of today that were just men serving their country, doing what they thought was right? One of the most well-known Confederate soldiers is General Robert E. Lee. General Robert E. Lee was the head of the Confederate forces. He was the head of the forces at the Battle of Antietam, which is one of the bloodiest days in, the bloodiest day in United States history, where our great country lost more men and boys than any other day in any other war since. So I'm going to focus on General Lee, because if he's just a soldier, then maybe the other ones were too. Robert E. Lee was born in the South to a mother and father who were affluent for the time. They didn't stay that way for very long. His father was a gambler, and when he was only 11 years old, he died, leaving his wife and 7 children with nothing. Mrs. Lee did what any woman with 7 children to care for would do. She moved back to her home in Virginia, where she stayed with and near her family. Her family were rich landowners that owned slaves in Virginia. Her son, Robert E. Lee, attended school and then did what many men of high birth but little means did. He joined the Army. He went to West Point and received his commission. At West Point, he was well respected, graduated second in his class, and went on to join the Army Corps of Engineers as an officer, where he spent the next almost 2 decades in the South building forts, making maps, building roads, building railroads, and serving his country honorably. He was integral in Texas in the Mexican-American War, where he received several accolades for selfless service, and was, to all that knew him, an amazing leader and a family man who very much loved his wife and his children and wanted to be with them as much as he could. When he was done serving his time in the Mexican-American War, he returned to West Point as head of the school. I don't know if any of you know this, but at the time, West Point was crumbling and falling apart, and he made renovations and additions and instituted training that's still used there today. That alone, that's an illustrious military career. There are men that have done less that have larger monuments to them. Shortly after he was done being the head of West Point, he returned to Texas to do surveying, and while he was there, he found out that his father-in-law had died and that his wife was very, very sick. So he took a convalescence and went back to Virginia to put his father-in-law's affairs in order and care for his sick wife, who was now wheelchair-bound. While he was on convalescence, Harper's Ferry happened. Harper's Ferry was a rebellion by several abolitionists who took over an armory, and Lee, because he was in the area, was ordered to take command of Virginia's forces and go put down the rebellion, which he did. Harper's Ferry made Lee a villain to the eyes of the North and a hero in the eyes of the South, and shortly thereafter the Civil War began. So Now we have a venerable military man with 7 children, a sick wife, and a plantation that is supporting not only his family, but also his extended family. And now we have a civil war that's about to abolish slavery. So why did he choose the Confederacy? Why did he go against his oath to the United States? Well, because he now had this plantation, he knew that he could not run it without slave labor. If they did away with slaves, it would put his family into poverty. He had already experienced that with his mother, and without that means of support of the plantation, his family wouldn't even have a safe place back home in Virginia to go to. So he sided with the forces that would allow him to take care of his family. And it's a hard decision, but soldiers don't always get to make that choice. Was it a bad choice? Probably. But it was a choice that he made in support of his family. So is Robert E. Lee worthy of remembrance? Before change to the Confederacy, he did amazing things for his country, for West Point. He served honorably with valor, cared for his officers and his soldiers and cadets. He was a loving father, son, and husband. There are so many correspondence that have been amassed of his letters back home, and I'm going to read you one that came from a letter to his daughter. It says, "It is very warm here. That is, if that is news, and as evidence, I enclose some violets I plucked in the yard of a deserted house I occupy. I wish I could see you and give them in person. Goodbye, my precious child. Give my love to everybody, and believe me, your affectionate father, R.E. Lee." That was written to his daughter. This is a man who loved his family and was only doing what he felt he needed to do to preserve their freedom and their rights. The soldiers that were in his care were often at the forefront of his letters. He cared very much for their sickness and their well-being, how they were being taken care of, and he cared about his other officers. There's one letter where his wife sent him socks, and he shared the socks with the other officers. To anyone that knows any of Civil War history, that's a very big deal to share something that was so precious and such a creature comfort at a time when people were very sick and very miserable. So, as a conclusion, Robert E. Lee was a soldier, a father, a good leader. He was placed into a difficult situation where he had to decide between the lives of his family and the lives of his slaves. He made a choice. Does that choice make him unworthy of remembrance for all of the other things that he did for his country? I'm not here to persuade you one way or the other. I'm here to give you facts. But I would like to leave you with one story. When we lived in Friedberg, Germany, there was a memorial downtown to all of the men and boys that were lost in World War II. These are actual Nazis. Not the tiki torch carrying kind, actual Nazis whose families set up a memorial for them because despite the fact that they were fighting on the wrong side, they were still their fathers and their sons, and they still did things in their community, and they wanted to remember them. And if Germans can remember their dead despite the fact that they were fighting for the wrong cause, maybe we should be able to do that too.